When you think of a nation's founder, what comes to mind? Probably a general, right? A revolutionary, or maybe a statesman. But what if the most important work didn't happen on a battlefield at all, but in a library? Today, we're cracking open the private books of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk to find the intellectual blueprint he used to build a modern nation. Just look at this. Right here, in his own handwriting, in one of his personal history books, Ataturk has marked this one critical line. In the ancient world, there was only one people who met all the conditions we have listed. These were the Phoenicians. So why on earth was the founder of a 20th century republic so obsessed with an ancient people famous for creating the alphabet? Well, that question is the key to this whole story. See, this thing with the Phoenicians, it wasn't just some random historical curiosity. For Ataturk, reading was a mission. This was a full-blown intellectual quest. He was hunting through the pages of history, looking for the raw materials, the ideas, the structures, and maybe most importantly, the warnings that he needed to build an entire nation from scratch. I mean, really think about that question. That was the enormous problem staring him right in the face. The Ottoman Empire, this 600-year-old institution, was gone. And in its place, something totally new had to be not just built, but imagined first. Where do you even start?
Look, we all know about his military victories. They're legendary. But the intellectual campaign he waged is just as critical. He knew that for any of this to stick, it had to be a revolution of the mind. So we have to picture him not just as a general, but as a scholar, poring over these books late into the night.
So to figure out where to go, Ataturk did something that sounds a little counterintuitive. He went backwards. And I mean way, way back. Not just a few centuries. He went all the way to the very dawn of civilization itself.
And get this, he's not just reading about kings and battles. He's reading about geology and prehistory. He's studying climate change during the first ice age. You can see his note in the margin, Première glaciaire, the first glaciers. He was trying to find the universal truths of human existence. You know, how do societies survive and adapt when the whole world changes around them?
And check this out. It really shows how deep he was going. He's studying these Neolithic dolmens. I mean, these are some of the very first monumental structures ever built by human hands. He was trying to answer a fundamental question. What makes people come together to build something that will outlast them? And this is so important to understand. For him, civilization wasn't just one thing. On the left, you've got a Swiss lake village, one of the earliest settled communities. On the right, a Phoenician stone carving, one of the first uses of a widespread alphabet. He understood that a nation is both a physical place and a shared idea. And that idea of a shared story leads us right into something he was absolutely obsessed with, language. For Ataturk, language wasn't just how people talk to each other. It was the scientific basis of a nation's identity. It was its cultural DNA. Okay, so to really get what he was doing, we have to wrap our heads around this concept. The language family. It's this idea that languages that seem really different, like say French, Russian, and even Persian, can all be traced back to a common ancestor. This fascinated him because it was like a map of how people and ideas moved across history. And boom, here's the proof right in his books. This is the Pictet diagram, and it shows the relationships between what were then called Aryan or Indo-European languages. He pored over charts like this, not for racial reasons, but to understand the mechanics of culture, how a shared linguistic root could tie people together across massive distances. And this is the moment. This is where all that deep, ancient history crashes right into the urgent needs of the 20th century. Look at the passage he underlined. It's all about how a simple alphabet allowed writing to penetrate the masses and communicate to all peoples. This wasn't just an interesting historical fact. For him, this was the justification for his own radical language reform, switching from the complex Arabic script to a brand new, simpler, Latin-based Turkish alphabet. But he didn't just stop at origins. He basically went on a world tour of empires, all from his library. He was studying their greatest hits and their biggest failures, figuring out what held them together and what eventually tore them apart. He was really into the Greek model of identity. He underlined this line from the orator Socrates, who was bragging that the Athenians were special because they weren't immigrants. They sprang right from their own soil. For Ataturk, this idea of a nation being deeply, authentically rooted in its land, that was a powerful concept. And then, in the next book, he'd pivot completely. He jumps thousands of miles away to study the philosophical core of Indian society, reincarnation, and the law of karma.
He was trying to understand how a society could be organized around a spiritual principle instead of a purely political one.
He also studied models that deliberately rejected Western influence. This line he read about China highlights a civilization that chose its own path, completely separate from that Mediterranean world he was just studying. He was collecting case studies in how to build a state. So, what's he doing with all this? Well, he's running this massive comparison in his head. On one side, you have the rigid, divinely ordered caste system of India, and on the other, you have the Greek ideal of the citizen, whose rights came from owning land and being part of the state. He was trying to figure out which model built a stronger, more dynamic society.
So all this deep diving into the ancient world, it was really all just the prelude to the main event, forging a truly modern republic. Now, he started to bring all those ancient lessons together with the most cutting-edge ideas of his own time.
And a key text for this phase was H.G. Wells's Outline of History. You have to remember, this book was a global bestseller in the 1920s. It told the story of all of humanity as one single narrative, moving towards a global future. For Ataturk, this signaled a big shift in focus, from the past to what was coming next. And just look at what he underlined in Wells's book, this idea that the world is always adapting, and that old loyalties, they're becoming temporary. Wells was even arguing that the nation-state itself might just be a passing phase. I mean, that's a pretty radical idea for a nation builder to be reading, let alone marking up.
And this wasn't just abstract theory, right? It connected directly to the politics of his day. Here, he's reading about the brand new League of Nations, which Wells called the potential germ of a permanent human federation. He saw that Turkey's future wasn't in isolation or trying to rebuild an old empire. It was about finding its place in a new, international, secular world.
And just like that, the whole thing comes together. The blueprint is finished. Think about that journey, from the Ice Age to the Phoenician alphabet, from the Greek citizen all the way to the League of Nations. All that reading, all that thinking, it all merged into one coherent vision for a modern, secular republic that knew its history but was facing the future. And it leaves us with a really powerful question, doesn't it? We often judge leaders by their actions, by their speeches. But maybe the truest insight we can get into their vision, their hopes, their fears, and their actual plans for the future is hiding in plain sight, on the shelves of their personal library. What are they reading? And why does it matter?